PFT PM Posse, the refs continue to throw flags for unnecessary roughness. Defensive receivers hit to the heads, etc., and players duck at the last 1/10 of a second before impact, even though it's unavoidable. We saw Jeff Heath throw his body sideways to avoid flags 3 years ago, but nobody else. How can it be avoided? Well, in some situations, it can't be avoided. And the league doesn't care. The league is so committed to protecting the health and welfare of receivers that if the guy does put his head or neck area in the path of a defender who hits him while the receiver is still defenseless, it's a 15-yard penalty. It's a fine, potentially, although that would be a good defense. Look, I went in with my shoulder. I went in with my side. I specifically tried to avoid hitting him in the head, but he ducked into it. But remember when they first became extra sensitive to hits to the head of defenseless receivers? It was right after that moment, October 17 of 2010, where there were 3 hits like 5 minutes apart in real time. And I always have to sit and remember, it was Dante Robinson hitting Deshaun Jackson. It was James Harrison hitting Mohamed Massaquoi, and it was Brandon Merriweather hitting Todd Heap. It all happened boom, boom, boom. After that, they really started to pay extra attention. They made it a point of emphasis. They told the officials for a while, err on the side of throwing the flag. Then they changed that language because they don't want to encourage the making of any errors whatsoever. Now, with roughing the passer, they still use when in doubt. That's not in the rule book for hits on defenseless receivers, but we see the flag fly when there is doubt. We see the flag fly when it is close, and that's just one of the risks you take when you go in to hit a receiver. And it's all part of this effort to do their best to make the game as safe as it can be for the folks who are in a defenseless posture. When you're in the process of trying to catch a pass, you should not be hitting the head or neck area or with the helmet of another player. PFT PM Posse, why don't the Cowboys ever use creative different uniforms? They would likely sell very well. Well, don't they do the white helmet and then they got the white jersey and they use the helmet with the red stripe on it this week? I love that one. That reminds me of 1976 when they had that all season long. I think the Cowboys are doing all right. I think the Cowboys don't need to get creative. I think enough people buy Cowboys stuff as it is that you don't need a lot of different options. They're still going to buy their Cowboys stuff. PFT PM Posse, one more. Will we ever see the massive increase in the salary cap we've repeatedly been told is coming from all the gambling money and the new TV deals? Based on the infinite ads we are bombarded with 24/7, 365, shouldn't it go up a lot really soon, like setting new pay ceilings for players? It's been going up. And they had to offset the pandemic losses. I think it's going to go up dramatically this year and next year. This is the first year. This year is the first year of the new TV deal. So this is the year there should be a big bump. Between the TV deals and the gambling partnerships, we should see a huge bump. But here's the reality. It's always negotiated. We think it's a mathematical formula. It's not. The league and the union come together and they decide what the salary cap is going to be. It's driven by various factors, but they decide through negotiation each year what it's going to be. But this is a year where it should go up. Rav Buffalo, hi Mike, offbeat question. John Cooper is the head coach of the Tampa Bay Lightning and won 2 Stanley Cups. He practiced law like you. I did not know that. Has there been or are there current any NFL head coaches with a law background who have had any success? Is there any crossover from the law that would help an NFL coach? I doubt that anybody actually went to law school and then got into coaching. You got to put your life, you got to put your focus, you got to put everything into coaching to have a chance to rise to the top of the profession. I'd have to sit and think about it. I'd have to research it. I've never really considered it, but there isn't anyone who comes to mind. And I'd like to think I'd remember if there was some reformed lawyer that wandered into coaching. And I feel like I'm missing someone now that I think about it. And it's making me feel horribly inadequate because I can't remember who it is. And it's probably on the tip of my tongue and I don't even realize it. So thanks for that question and giving me all this angst. Anyway, I think that there are some transferable skills because when you go from coordinator to coach, when you're coordinator, offensive or defensive, it's all X's and O's. When you're head coach, there's more to the job. When you're head coach, you're the face of the franchise. You're the communicator. You're the one that is constantly taking questions from reporters. You got to know how to stick handle your way through difficult situations. You got to know how to speak extemporaneously in a way that placates the fan base, placates the media, but also doesn't give away any of your secrets. I mean, that's one of my big problems with Bill Belichick. He doesn't have to be the way he is. He's so guarded. He's so concerned. He's going to open his mouth and the secret code to beating the Patriots is going to fly out of it, that he doesn't say anything. It's just grumble and grunt And it's like he's being interrogated. Name, rank, and serial number is all you're getting from him. Contrast that with Nick Saban. He will give you a very engaging press conference. He will act like he's saying all sorts of interesting stuff. And then you go back and look at the transcript and you say, God, guy didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. It sure sounded like he was saying something. He was animated and his inflection changed and used his hands. Didn't say anything. So there's a way to do it. There's a way to communicate. There's a way to give. This is the key. I had somebody ask me this when I was practicing law. I had a client that was not getting great coverage in the local newspaper and was very standoffish about giving information. I said, you know what? There's got to be some stuff that you don't care if they know. There's got to be some stuff that actually helps you if they know. Let them do their jobs. Give them something, and then they'll leave you alone. They're just trying to write a story. They don't need to crack the code for your Kittner boy readout safe. They just want something to fill up the spot in the page. And, you know, for all the brilliance of Bill Belichick, he really is an enigmatic and compelling figure, because when it comes to emotional intelligence, as it relates to dealing with the media, he has none. It's amazing he's lasted as long as he did. And the reason he has is because he won. If he hadn't won, he'd have been gone before the end of the 2002 season. It's 2020, but it's not 2002. I never did that. It's 2002. Regardless, he would have been gone by then. He would have been gone by the end of his third year. And Tom Brady, and we've talked about this before, to a certain extent, allowed the Patriot way to thrive. He's not more responsible than Bill Belichick, but it wouldn't have happened without Brady submitting to that same attitude that we still see from Belichick directed to the media. And it's too late for him to change. He's not going to change. He'll go somewhere else and he'll coach and he'll be the same guy he's always been. Because when someone trades for him, if that's what happens, and pays him, he'll view that as validation of what he's always done, and he'll just keep doing it. James M., Dr. J144, I saw a player in college fumble in the process of getting injured on a play last week. It's always bothered me that guys need to maintain possession through an injury. What would you think of a new injury can't cause a fumble rule? I don't like it. You know why? How do you ever police that? How do you ever know that I mean, we kind of know it when we see it, but I think it happens so infrequently, it's not worth the trouble of trying to come up with language and interpret it and apply it and get it right all the time. Fumble's a fumble. However it happens, fumble's a fumble. And if it's a fumble, it's a fumble, period. That's pretty profound. If it's a fumble, it's a fumble. Put that on a bumper sticker, why don't you? RB Roughnecks, do you think Jimbo Fisher's firing is going not only to be a performance-based firing, but also because of NIL paying players violations? No evidence yet. It seems odd to fire him before the regular season is over, in the beginning of a gigantic contract, and after a 50-plus point win. Well, first of all, it's not at the beginning of a gigantic contract. It's 5 years in. And last year they were 5-7. And this year they were 5-4 going into that 50-point win over Mississippi State, which they expected. Mississippi State fired their head coach too. I can't think of a time when after a game, both head coaches got fired, at least at the college level. It's probably happened at the end of a season at the NFL level where it was already known it was going to happen. And I think that's the key with A&M. They already knew they were doing it. I just think that they know the drill here. They've got the money to put together a program that is among the best in the country, and they're willing to spend it. Some people will say, oh, well, there's no way they can pay a lot of money to a coach now that they're paying $76 million to Jimbo Fisher to walk away. There's more where that came from. Like Homer Simpson, when he first started losing hair, flashback episode, he's got a full head of hair and a clump of it falls out. And he says, oh, there's more where that came from. Yeah, there was. And Texas A&M has more of it too. And they're not going to go bald for a long time. I think they're going to swing for the fences. I don't think they fired Jimbo Fisher and paid him $74 million or $76 million or whatever it is to walk away to just hire some no-name guy. And that's why we talked about this today on PFT Live. That's why I think they are going to call Dan Campbell. Why wouldn't they call Why wouldn't they call? I know Lions fans get triggered, and I know people on social media who just don't get it want to call me out and call me an idiot. I'm right on this one. There's too much money in college football to not try to get the biggest name possible, to not try to get the guy that would create the greatest excitement for the fan base and success for the team. And Dan Campbell would do that at Texas A&M. And given what NFL teams are paying coaches right now, colleges are in a better position. It's a lot easier to pay big money to the coaches when you don't have a line item in the budget to pay players. Another one from Dr. J144. I get that teams have injuries and bad luck. However, teams like Arizona and even New England and Carolina have continued to compete despite a talent gap. The Giants don't look like an NFL team and haven't all year. What's the fallout going to be in New York after this season, in your opinion? Well, look, a wise man has said repeatedly over the last 30 years or 40 years, coming on 50 years on ESPN, once is an accident, twice is a trend. 3 times in a row now, John Mara has fired a coach after 2 seasons. It was first Ben McAdoo, went to the playoffs his first year, got fired during his second year. Then it was Pat Shurmur. Then it was Joe Judge. 2 years or less for each guy. It's like last year didn't even happen. Brian Daboll, coach of the year. It's like it didn't even happen. Daboll addressed it today. He was asked what ownership thinks about what's happening, and he said, like everybody else, nobody's happy. But it really has been bad. The question is, can John Mara resist the temptation to make wholesale changes again? It would be the 4th straight coach that gets 2 years or fewer. At a certain point, it is the organization. At a certain point, it is ownership. You can't fire the owner, but sometimes the owner should be fired, or sometimes the owner should just back the hell off and let the grown-ups, let the professionals, let the ones who have been trained and experienced in running a football operation do so. World Chimp, the Seahawks have the following upcoming stretch of games: 49ers, Cowboys, 49ers, Eagles. Is this amen corner of games the most important stretch of games for Geno Smith and his NFL career? I've been fascinated by this 4-game stretch that begins next Thursday night on NBC, 49ers at Seahawks. The next Thursday night on Prime, it's Cowboys hosting the Seahawks. Then it's 49ers again, then it's Eagles. Yeah, this is it. This is Murderer's Row. This is whatever cliche you want to use. And this is going to tell us whether or not the Seahawks are a contender or just a team that's going to be jockeying for the 7th seed or maybe the 6th seed in the NFC. They win 2 of those games, maybe 3 of those games. They win 2 of those games, okay. They win 3, all right. They sweep them, which I would not play that parlay if I was inclined to bet, and I'm not. They win those 4, they may be the 1 seed in the NFC because they already hold the tiebreaker with the Lions. So it's a tough stretch. And remember, that contract, and this happens all the time, the initial numbers that get leaked are caca, to use my current favorite word, and I can't help it. Just something about that word that makes me want to laugh. But 3 years, 100 and something million. It's a 1-year, $28 million deal. They can move on anytime they want. Now, he played well on Sunday. Got a lot of praise from Pete Carroll for what he did in the 4th quarter, but that was the Commanders. Let's see what they do. 49ers, Cowboys, 49ers, Eagles. Dilip Rao, big Broncos fan. Not seeing the glasses half full now that they've won 3 in a row, beating along the way both the Chiefs and the Bills. Are the Broncos in danger of being just good enough to not get better? As they sustain wins against lauded but flawed opponents and are unlikely to enter the postseason, aren't they squandering draft standing, or is winning more important to a losing culture than any one player? Sean Payton, on PFT Live, right after he resigned from the Saints in Los Angeles, we had this conversation about tanking. And he harkened back to the game between the Saints and the Buccaneers, final week of 2014, where the Bucs were up 21-10 at halftime, and they tanked to get the 1st overall pick in the draft. They took out half of their starting lineup. It's hilarious the way Peyton tells the story. He says, I've got people who speak to me in my headset that 26 is in for 22. 31 is in for 30. He said it was like a bingo game. They wouldn't stop of all the different, this guy's in for this guy, this guy's in for this guy, this guy's in for this guy, this guy's in for this guy. They took out half their starters, and the Saints won, and the Bucs got the 1st overall pick in the draft, and they got Jameis Winston, and some would say that's punishment enough. Peyton's point is this: you should never do anything but try to win. That is the culture you're trying to build, that if you're not trying to win, the players sense it, and you lose them. I think what they're doing now lays a great foundation for the future. And hey, Russell Wilson has turned it around. Last year was a blip. Compared to this year, That throw he made to Cortland Sutton, pivoting, turning, spinning, dropping it right in there for Cortland Sutton to catch the ball at the front end of the goal line. Incredible. The little flips he makes to Samaje Perine. Vikings got their hands full on Sunday night. Sean Payton's turning this team around. And they were as low as you could get when they gave up 70 points in week 3 to the Dolphins. And look at where they are now. I would say enjoy the victories this year, even if it causes the Broncos to draft in a lower spot than they otherwise would. It's laying the foundation for success sooner than later in Denver. Skull Vikings 407. What's Macy doing back there? What you doing, doggy? You all right? Is it better for playoff hopes for the Saints to start Jameis Winston over Derek Carr? No. Look, Derek Carr initially came in with Jameis Winston initially came in place of Derek Carr on Sunday in Minnesota with a no F's given attitude and turned a 27-3 game into 27-19. But what ultimately happened? 2 interceptions and another ball that could have been picked off. I think we saw why Jameis Winston is no longer an NFL starter. He has a role to play if the starter gets injured, but I think Derek Carr is still the way to go. And also, they're tied to Derek Carr financially through next year. They're not going to bench him this year. I don't think. Mac Moon, do you think the winning coach of this Sunday Night Football matchup will be in the leader house, that's a Sims phrase, for Coach of the Year? I think it's still too early. I think D'Amico Ryans right now makes the best case because Sims and I talked about this earlier today. Coach of the Year is kind of loosely determined by looking at the generally accepted preseason expectations for a team and then seeing how far they were exceeded by the performance of the team. Compare what we thought we were going to get to what we got. And with the Texans, Sims and I both said before the season, that's the one team that's not going to make it. You look at any team in the AFC and say, that team's not going to make it. I see you back there, Macy. You see any team that's not going to make it, the Texans are the first team out. And then maybe the Raiders. And look at where they are at 5-4. They make the playoffs. I think D'Amico Ryans needs to get serious consideration. Kevin O'Connell deserves consideration if the Vikings make it. Dan Campbell, if the Lions end up with the 1 seed, deserves consideration. A lot of great candidates for Coach of the Year, but a lot of football left to determine who ultimately gets it. Chris Hatfield, can the Broncos beat the Vikings? Yes. Next question. Here's what I'm concerned about. I think I mentioned this on PFT Live. Last year, the Vikings at Buffalo won a crazy game, down at the wire, excitement, Kirko chains, shirt off, dancing on the way home, heroes welcome at US Bank Stadium the following Sunday, and the final score was Dallas 40, Minnesota 3. There's a potential for a letdown here, and it's even more pronounced because the Broncos played Monday night, got back Tuesday morning, next train's coming in 5 days. Can they put this unlikely win behind them and refocus on the hottest team in football right now, who won 5 in a row? They can do it, and I suspect Sean Payton will be up their butts all week about not having the letdown. Look at what happened in Minnesota last year. I guarantee you he will tell that story to them. Last year, it was Minnesota, week 10. Look at this play. Look at that play. Look at all this crazy stuff that happened. And then here's what happened the next week. I could see him. I could envision him standing in front of his team, showing the Vikings highlights for that crazy, remember that 4th down play where Justin Jefferson somehow caught it, and then the Vikings go for it 4th and goal, and they don't get it. And then the next play, Josh Allen fumbles, and it's recovered by the Vikings. I mean, just craziness. And the next week, the Vikings lost. And you show the clips of the Cowboys steamrolling the Vikings the next week. That's what you do. That's the little stuff you do to get your team to guard against the letdown. We'll see if it matters. Brian Lau, week 13, 49ers Eagles will not be flexed to Sunday night in order for Fox to keep that game on their network at the 4:25 p.m. window. Is this going to be a trend moving forward for CBS and Fox to protect their marquee matchups? They already have. And I think there's another question about flexing. I think I scrolled through them quickly earlier about why, maybe that was the question. Usually I don't read these, and that was just one that caught my attention, but not closely enough because I didn't remember it properly. I thought it was a question about flexing generally this year. Since flexing started in 2006, both CBS and Fox have had the ability to protect a certain number of games. And still, at the end of the day, it's an NFL decision. I haven't seen the full rules yet. My concern is that the NFL has kind of painted itself into a corner with the flexing rules that come along with Thursday night and Monday night flexing. The protections afforded to CBS and Fox complicate dramatically the flexing process to the point where it could be an issue week 18. Apparently, there's some rule out there that if a divisional game has already been televised in prime time, let's say, and let me try to think of a primetime divisional game where the rematch comes week 18. Ravens-Bengals. Ravens-Bengals play week 18. Do they play week 18? No, it's Ravens-Steelers. Never mind. Shit. Well, anyway, if there's been I'll just abandon that and move on. When did Cowboys-Eagles was late afternoon? Anyway, if there's a late afternoon divisional game that's already been played in prime time, I think they can't play it again in prime time. So if we get to the end of the road and, you get that playoff play-in game that we're looking for, and they're all divisional matchups in week 18, if for some reason that divisional matchup has already been played in prime time, it's off the table, even if that's the only one. You know how it kind of works out most years? Doesn't always work out that way, but most years it works out to be, hey, look at this. There's a playoff play-in game from whichever division. Last year it was Titans-Jaguars. So that's something to keep in mind. And I just think generally this new expanded flex possibility makes it harder for any games to be flexed. And we've yet to see any be flexed. But remember, Monday and Thursday come into the mix later in the season as well. Anastasia Williams, will the Giants draft a quarterback if they get the number 1 or number 2 pick? They absolutely should. Is Daniel Jones done being the guy for the Giants? Well, they've got him under contract for 1 more year, fully guaranteed. That doesn't stop them from drafting a quarterback and putting him on the bench. It's the Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes situation. Now, if there would be a regime change in New York after the season, that makes it even more likely they use that high pick on a quarterback. A lot of it depends on what they think of the quarterbacks who are available and whether or not they are in position to get that quarterback, and whether or not there's somebody else that wants to trade up to get that quarterback and what they would offer. A lot of moving parts here, but it looks like they're going to be in position to get one of the top quarterbacks. The question is, will they? And I don't think having Daniel Jones under contract will stop them from doing it, because again, it was a 2-year deal. Whenever, remember this, when March rolls around and the offseason rolls around and they start doing contracts, the initial reports you're going to hear from the information robots are caca. We'll give you the truth. We'll get the full details and we'll tell you what it really is. Daniel Jones is a 4-year deal. It's a 2-year deal. After next year, they can move on. Tyler Hergert, this is an interesting question. If you could show someone one NFL game, if they've never watched football before, what is the game that you would show them? That is a hell of a question. What is the game I would show to someone who's never watched football before? Wow. I would want it to be a Super Bowl. And I would want it to be a Super Bowl that had a great finish. I think back to Super Bowl 13. But when you go back and watch those old games, it really is amazing how different it is in comparison to today's NFL. So if it's somebody who's never watched football but plans to keep watching football, I wouldn't want to give them a skewed representation of what football is really about by showing them something like Super Bowl 13, which is one of the great games ever played, and which was, a Super Bowl that kind of flipped this narrative that the Super Bowls all stink. Because really, back in the 70s, the Super Bowl was kind of like, gee, we hope we get a good game, but we know we're not going to get a good game. And then boom, here comes Super Bowl 13, and it was a barn burner, 35-31. So a more modern game that I think was very compelling. That Saints-Vikings 2009 NFC Championship was a hell of a game. There have been plenty of great Super Bowls recently. Bills-Chiefs, the divisional round game a couple of years ago. I don't know, but see, the fact that it's somebody, this is the challenge. They've never watched football before. You want a game that's going to draw them in so they watch more football. You don't want to ruin them, right? You don't want to give them the best game ever right out of the gates, because then they're going to be like, well, why am I watching this? You showed me Super Bowl 51, 28-3, and the great comeback. This is boring. Give me more of that game you showed me that made me interested in football. So I think there's a complicated psychological exercise here that I don't have the time or the ability to engage in that relates to the era of the game and how good of a game it is. I want it to be just good enough that it makes the viewer hooked on watching more football. JC Carm, is Derek Henry a Hall of Famer? I saw that one earlier, and I pulled up the all-time rushing list. 8,960 yards for Derek Henry. He's 39th. Now, he's got more rushing yards than a couple of Hall of Famers. He's got more rushing yards than Jim Taylor. He's got more rushing yards than Larry Zonka. He's got more rushing yards than Terrell Davis. He's got more rushing yards than Leroy Kelly and John Henry Johnson. Different eras, different times. Floyd Little, 6,300 rushing yards, and he's in. Steve Van Buren of the Van Buren Boys, 5,860. That was with the Eagles from 1944 through 1951. I first became aware of Steve Van Buren because Fran Tarkenton somewhere said or wrote when he was a kid, he played with football cards and Steve Van Buren was his favorite player. I've never forgotten that. Anyway, no Super Bowl appearances. They've never made it past the AFC Championship game. He's 39th overall right now. Now, working in his favor is the fact that if there will be an assumption that some guys from this era of football at the running back position are going to get in, I mean, I think Frank Gore's a no-brainer. He's third overall in rushing with 16,000 yards exactly. I think Derek Henry has a chance. I just think he has more work to do. I think at a minimum, he needs to get to 10,000 yards, which would put him exactly at number 31 on the all-time list, just ahead of Ricky Williams. I mean, we don't talk about Ricky Williams as a Hall of Famer. Otis Anderson isn't in the Hall of Fame. Will Marshawn Lynch get in? Maybe. Eddie George, he's never been discussed as a Hall of Famer. He's got over 10,000 yards. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. I think for now it's a no. He's got more work to do. But if he would get in that range between Joe Perry with 9,700 yards and O.J. Simpson with 11,200, maybe because of the era, if the voters feel compelled, like, hey, we haven't put any running backs in a while. What about the running back? You know, Frank Gore, who else? How about Derek Henry? Then maybe he's got a chance. But my gut tells me he's got more work to do. All right, let's see if I have more questions to answer here. You know, some of these are good, but I'm just gonna skip over them. Some of them are funny. I'm gonna skip over them. Here's one life question from Curtis E. Flush. I'm sure that's his real name. Maybe it is. I feel bad saying that if it is his real name. All right, Curtis. Life question. How do you stay productive while working at home? I started a work from home job recently and found myself easily distracted by chores, pets, sports media, LOL. Tips on staying focused. Well, maybe she's still hanging out down there. The garbage truck's outside. I'm surprised she's not barking at it. I've been working at home for so long, I don't really know what to tell you other than you just do it. You do what you have to do. And I've learned to work very quickly. I've learned to write very quickly. I've learned to think very quickly. I've learned to be very efficient with my time. I've learned to be very protective of my time so I can constantly, all I need is 15 to 20 minutes and I can get a story done for the most part. Some of them are longer and take a little more time, but a lot of the stuff, like the Deshaun Watson story today, the news broke right as PFT Live was ending. I came straight downstairs. 10 minutes later, story was up. I just think you learn through time how to wall yourself off. And I'm fortunate that my wife fully supports and understands what I'm doing. She gives me the space while I'm here to kind of be in my bubble, to be in my zone, and to understand when I'm here, I'm working. Like, I'm not just home hanging out watching TV. I'm not home and available to do whatever needs to be done during the course of the day. I'm at work. I just coincidentally happen to be at home. So you need that as well. You need folks who live in the house who understand what you're trying to do. And you need to have a space that is kind of your own little fortress of solitude, like Superman or Susan Ross's father. That's your sanctuary, as he said about the cabin. Cherish the cabin. But I digress. I definitely digress. And you know what? Sometimes I'll go down to the barn and work in the daytime, but that's usually a nighttime place for me to just kind of make sure I can focus. But you just have to focus. You got to find a place where you have minimal distractions. It's on you to minimize your distractions. Don't be checking PFT every 5 minutes. We'll settle for every 10 minutes. And you just do it. You just do it. And the thing that should drive you to do it is the fact that you have the gift of working at home. When you remove from the equation having to get in your car and go somewhere and go into a place where you're constantly distracted by coworkers, constantly distracted by small talk, constantly distracted by the box of donuts that somebody brought in. I think there are far more distractions if you work in an office than if you work at home. And there's noise, and there's this, and there's that, and there's the forced socialization that you feel compelled to engage in. There's the stupid little fights over who ate my chicken salad out of the refrigerator. No, working at home is great. So courtesy flush, appreciate it, and just work to stay as focused as you can, because working at home, in my view, is far better than working in an office around other people. And at least as far as the other people who would be working around me are concerned, probably better for them that I'm not there to have to deal with. All right, you're done dealing with me. My God, we went for an hour today. Didn't plan to do that. Next week, I'm going to try to go 90 minutes talking about the 3 games from Thanksgiving, plus answering your questions. Again, Black Friday edition of PFT PM, PFT Live every weekday, Mega Picks podcast tomorrow afternoon. Chris and I are going to pick all the games for week 11. It is already week 11. Thanks as always for some of your time. We'll talk to you real soon. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.